Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Your Health in Your Hands. I'm Dr. David Ajibade with the Brain and Body Foundation. Now, as you know, we are deeply interested in the brain, not just of children, but also of adults as well. And being from Africa, I've said this over and over again, that we do tend to have problems. We do tend to have some what's the word now? Shall we say deficiencies? That make us more prone to certain kinds of brain conditions like strokes, dementias, and so on and so forth. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a talk with Dr. Greg Hall, who we went back and forth about how Black African Americans are more prone to these conditions, heart disease, cancers, brain conditions, and all that. And we discussed why. So if you ever watched that, you need to go back to our website and check out brainandbodyfoundation.org and watch those videos because it's really good stuff. But our main deal is the brain. That's why it's called the Brain and Body Foundation. And there are three things we're interested in. One, how to keep your brain healthy throughout life. Number two, how to recognize problems and do something about them as they occur. Let's say your memory is beginning to fail, or you're beginning to have mood problems or behavioral problems, or whatever, anxiety, depression, those things. You need to not take those things for granted. You need to know what to do, and you need to do it right there and then as quickly as possible, ASAP, in other words. Number three, the third thing we're super interested in is when you have these issues, and many of us Africans have these issues like dementia, strokes, actual major neurological problems, and we tend to hide them. And we don't go and see the doctor until it becomes advanced. And that's when we begin to do something. We start running up and down looking for solutions. Even at that stage, we are now beginning to find out that there are things that can be done to improve brain function. So has been a passion of mine. Many times every year, I would go to the US twice a year and seek for breakthroughs in this area. What can we use? What can we use in Nigerians, adults and children as well, that is not only effective, that is not only simple to use, but most importantly, that is safe. In other words, we don't have to worry about toxicity levels or blood levels going too high or causing damage or side effects. What is safe that people can use? So the market woman, Mama Sikira, is what I always refer to. Mama Sikira can feel safe that she's doing something for her child's brain that is improving her child's brain. Same thing as Mama Sikira's mother or grandmother. What can she do if her grandmother is acting or has dementia? What can she do to help her? That's our goal. That's our passion. So that's why it was super exciting to me when I met our guest today. His name is Dr. John Lewis. Are you there, sir? All right, Dr. John Lewis, thank you so much for being on our show today. Thank you so much. Why don't you go ahead You bet. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everyone, millions and millions of Nigerians, how great you are.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm happy to give you a little synopsis of who I am. So I've spent many years of my life really looking for ways to help people be healthy. That's really fundamentally who I am and what I do. I studied many things in school, in my professional training, my education in terms of physiology, nutrition, and exercise training. These were things that were inspirational to me as a 20-something-year-old, and now as a 50-something-year-old, 30 years later, it's hard to believe, but I'm still doing the same thing in terms of my interest in finding, just to your point, things that are natural, that are not only natural, but effective, and then also as just as important, safe. And so that's what I've focused on in my career, both in academics and now in business. I spent close to 20 years at the University of Miami Medical School as a professor there, conducting clinical trials in all sorts of different things. And unfortunately for me, the funding really always dictated kind of what I could do. You know, it's like running research is expensive. It's not cheap. And you have to have a budget to be able to do that. The university will support you in some respects, but the university still expects you to bring in money to be able to do your research. So you're really kind of, even though you're a scientist and an academic, but on the other hand, you're really you're kind of an entrepreneur and a marketer and a businessman and a salesman as well, because you have to be able to convince other people who have money to give you some of that money to be able to do your research.
Right.
And so that's a very important distinction that I think, I don't know, so much about the experience worldwide, but I can tell you in the United States or in Nigeria, other countries around the world, I can't speak to that experience of, how it works there, but I can tell you in the United States, you have to be a good fundraiser along with being a good scientist to be able to advance your career.
You have, to be you have to be a salesman, in other words.
Exactly, you really do. And
Yeah.
it's not being a salesman like, you and I having a conversation. It's being a salesman with your pen or your keyboard. You have to be able to draft a very compelling and convincing document that you then send off. I always call it a black hole, because you just, you send this proposal into this system where you don't really know these people that's going to read it, and you don't know, maybe they're having a bad day. They're angry at their wife, excuse me, or their kid or their husband or whoever, and they're reading this proposal from this guy, John Lewis at the University of Miami. Who is this guy, and why is he asking us for, $500,000? So, to me, it's like a big mystery of how a lot of these funding agencies fund research. But anyway, after about 20 years of all of that, I left academics full time about 6 years ago, and I've been in business for myself since that time. And the work that I've been doing related to your work and those, I'm sure the interest of many of your viewers is related to, as you pointed out, brain health. And so a lot of the clinical research that I conducted was very specific to looking at nutritional interventions and how that would potentially improve someone's cognition. And as you well know,
sorry, John, let me cut you off. We're going to edit something out now. But is there any way you can tilt the camera so that less than half of what the space is there now? Yeah, there's too much space above your head. Downwards. There's too much space. There was too much space above your head. Okay. One more time. A little bit more. Good. That's perfect. Yeah. As long as you don't lean, tilt it a little bit upwards, so there's some space between that and your hair, and your hairline.
Let me hold on.
Okay. Is it a laptop?
It is.
Okay.
How's that?
That's almost perfect. Tilt it just a little bit more downwards. Perfect. That's great.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to get back into that. But you didn't mention what you're a professor of. I think you just say you were a professor. So so if you don't mind, start by saying that you're a professor of so and so, and then this is how you started getting into brain health.
Okay, sure. So I was a professor of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences for close to 20 years full-time. I'm still a voluntary associate professor. I resigned full-time back in 2017 in May to leave academics and go into business, but I do still maintain my academic affiliation because it's nice to have, people respect that level of relationship to a University of Miami. I mean, it's not Yale or Harvard or Stanford or Duke, but it is a fairly well-recognized university, especially in Latin America. We have a lot of relationships with other universities, Miami being sort of the gateway to Latin America, if you will, for the United States.
Right.
But you may wonder why a physiologist was in the Department of Psychiatry. That's always something that, well, maybe not always, but sometimes people say, well, how did a physiologist end up in the Department of Psychiatry? And that was simply due to when I was a graduate student at the University of Miami, my assistantship in my department in the School of Education did not cover me for the summers. And so obviously I still had to have, pay for my rent and my food and all my other life's expenses. And I ended up finding a job as a research assistant with a psychologist at the medical school in the Department of Psychiatry. And so I just created sort of a path or a connection there in the department, and I was able to meet the chairman and created a really a long line of research there with my colleagues in the department. And so I I was able to combine my own interest in nutrition and dietary supplementation and exercise with some of the other work that was being done in terms of, cognition, mood disorder, anything related to mental health. Of course, there were lots of people, lots of experts, either psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, et cetera, who I could rely on for that level of expertise for things that would be related to, the brain or the mind. But where this really all took off for me was about 17 years ago or so. I met a gentleman by the name of Dr. Reg McDaniel, who a pathologist in the Dallas area I met through a mutual acquaintance. And Reg and I became fast friends up until this day, actually. I mean, just somebody that I really love and admire and cherish for everything that he has done for me and helped me with in my career. But Reg introduced me to this concept of polysaccharides and the value of what polysaccharides were. Well, I could tell you in my training as a student, I mean, I think I maybe learned, about saccharides over the course of a few lectures in biochemistry, and I understood their value as an energy source. But in terms of everything else they do for our cells, I had no clue. And I don't think my professors did either, because none of this was even part of the curriculum that I learned as a graduate student. But what I learned through Reg and other people as I've gone down this path now is how crucial these polysaccharides are to us. And if I use the word complex sugar and I said, well, you know what, sugars are good for you, you'd probably laugh at me. You'd think, what's this guy talking about? Sugars are not good for us.
That's right.
Sugars are bad for us. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Man, what are you talking about? So,
Yeah.
But as you know, and as probably many of your viewers know as well, there are lots of different sugars in Mother Nature. And so it depends on the sugar type, whether or not it could be good or bad for us. And so obviously something like sucrose or high fructose corn syrup, those are sugars we really want to avoid.
Right.
But these complex polysaccharides that are found in things like aloe vera and rice bran, those are the two that I really focused a lot of my research on, are just amazing for us. I mean, it's incredible how valuable these particular polysaccharides are. And unfortunately, the average person today just is not eating, you'd have to go out of your way to really get these in the diet today.
Yep.
But if you give them in concentrated amounts to someone, then it's dynamic. It's like giving your automobile that maybe has a little bit of water in the gas tank. You've only been using the low grade gasoline. You get the water cleaned out, you start using high test gasoline, and now your engine starts running like a brand new car again. Same thing with our cells. If we haven't been eating well, we don't exercise, maybe we use tobacco, alcohol, we don't manage our stress, we have insomnia, all these other things I'm sure you and many other guests have discussed in previous sessions. But if that happens and you live a typical life, then over time, as we age, you don't really notice these types of changes so much as as a 20-something. But once you hit middle age and then later in life, now this cellular replication that's been happening in a decreasingly effective way, you start noticing these things. So to what you were saying earlier about things related to dementia or diabetes or cancer, or heart disease, all these things are at least partially attributed to this cellular replication that unfortunately gets worse and worse over time. And a big reason for why it gets worse, again, goes back to this notion of poor nutrition or not eating optimally, things that really help us and can be beneficial to our health. So this is where I went down. If you'd like to discuss, some of the particulars of this research, I'd be happy to share that with you and your viewers. But this is really where I focused a great much of my career and my life on, actually.
That's fascinating stuff. What is really interesting to me about the whole thing with sugars, actually, by the way, that sugars were how I got interested in the whole nutrients and nutraceutical route. It was, I believe it was Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson, who was an idol of mine in medical school. And he had a wonderful testimonial with, I think he had aggressive kind of prostate cancer. And he talked about how the nutrients helped in his recovery. He still did the surgery and went the whole medical route, but he used the sugars in addition to that. And his results were far beyond what he could have gotten just by using the medical route alone. And just listening to him and hearing his story, and from that, I began to delve more and more into these sugars. And I'm sure, again, people, they're still wondering after listening to people about sugars, they're like, what are these people talking about? And we'll get into it some more, but just it was from there that I now realized how effective these sugars could be, even for brain function. And from Dr. Reg, I began to hear story after story after story about how this they were able to address brain conditions that were, according to medical science, impossible to be addressed. And so that really got me into it. So yeah, definitely would love for us to talk some more. Now, the main thing I'm hearing you say is replication, that it helps in the replication of cells, helps them replicate more effectively. But let's talk about it with regards to the brain function. How do these sugars, and we probably should get some picture of the sugars and put them on or something, but how do these sugars specifically help with brain function?
Great question. So we can, I guess some of this is a bit theoretical still, because again, we haven't had enough money to fund really what we would consider to be the most definitive study to date. But what we do know from the research that we've conducted so far is that giving people these high doses of polysaccharides results in several things. First of all, lowers inflammation. So this is obviously, as you know, a big factor, not only in dementia, but everything else. Everything, go to any section of the medical or scientific literature related to human health, and there is some aspect of it related to inflammation. And of course, chronic inflammation is what we're referring to here. We're not referring to acute inflammation, which is obviously very beneficial in the context of, being sick with a virus or bacteria or having trauma. That acute inflammation is obviously very important for us and helps us heal. But the chronic dysregulated systemic inflammation that gets out of hand over time, this is a very important issue that needs to be addressed for just about, anybody you could pick. I mean, I'm sure there are very optimally healthy people out there that have regular low levels of inflammation, but for those of us that have different types of conditions, getting this inflammation under control is very important. So what we showed in the Alzheimer's study was that we could actually lower TNF-alpha and VEGF. These are two proteins that classically have been looked at in heart disease and cancer. But our group was probably one of, if not the first, to show we could actually lower that in Alzheimer's disease. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is looking at immune modulation or immune function and how that interacts with all the other major organ systems, particularly the central nervous system, and then even more specific, the brain. So obviously we know now, and it's still an evolving science, it's still an evolving field of how the immune system talks to all of our other major organ systems. But we know that, and actually I'm just doing something right now, I've tapped into a new analysis linking immune function with cognition that I hope will be another paper that we will publish sometime this year. But one very important aspect of immune function is the CD4 to CD8 ratio. And as we get older, that's an even more important indicator of our overall immune function status. So CD4 being our T helper cells and CD8 being our cytotoxic cells, we want to keep that ratio CD4 to CD8 as high as possible. And especially for people that have dementia, and especially older people, that's even more important to keep aware or to be aware of. And if that ratio gets low, then what you're actually you end up with even a greater risk for things like heart disease and cancer on top of just general immune function. So we were able to increase that measure. And then the third thing that we showed in our study is that we could.
Just a quick one. CD4 to CD8, is there like a normal ratio, an optimal ratio? And CD4, if I remember, that has to do with HIV. That was the main thing in HIV, right?
It does, exactly. So that's a great question. I'm sorry I didn't address that. I have not actually been able to find, like when we think of things like CD4 to CD8 ratio or even TNF alpha or VEGF, what's the clinical threshold is I think what you're getting to. Like, is there a level where you should be, or else if you're not, then you're at this risk of,
Right.
X, Y, or Z. So to your point about HIV, and actually we ran another study in people with HIV that we looked at this. What we do know in HIV is that if that CD4 to CD8 ratio goes below 1.0, so it gets less than unity, then that is definitely where if someone has HIV, that's a problem. And then 80% of the time, the infectious disease physician will try to change the medication regimen to help the ratio get back above 1.0. And this is a separate study that we could talk about maybe in another interview. But we actually showed with the rice bran polysaccharide, we got that value up above 1.0, whereas the placebo did not. But in terms of like general health, that's a great question. I haven't been able to find the ratio where it's been documented or validated that says, okay, you want your CD4 to CD8 ratio to be above this value and then you're good. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to come up with that value, but.
Got it. But what have you been seeing from your work? So should it be like, have you seen that 2 to 0 or 2 to 1.5? Is it looks
so
brain health?
So in the Alzheimer's study, we went from, I believe it was like 2.2 at baseline to 3.5 at 12 months. And that correlated with the cognitive function. So it would appear to be that, anything above 3, I guess to kind of, give you some sort of an idea of a value, anything above 3 would definitely be, in this case, better. And remember, in our study, these were people with moderate to severe disease, and they also had other comorbid conditions. So these were very sick, and they were 79.9 years of age on average. So very severe disease, very old, and had other comorbid conditions as well.
Got it. So with the CD4 should be like 3 times, I shouldn't say should be, but what you've seen is that 3 times higher than the CD8, which is the inflammatory proteins. The CD4
right.
Proteins, the CD8 are the inflammatory or the pro-inflammatory proteins. Having a ratio of 3 times that of the CD8 seem to be more helpful or beneficial towards brain function. Is that a good layman's way of saying it?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Great.
And then
you had the third point you're going to talk about with regards to the studies.
Yes, and then the third one was the CD14 cells. So CD14 cells being a marker of adult stem cell production. Again, remembering that these folks were 79.9 years of age on average. They had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's at least for 1 year. We actually showed just under a 300% increase in CD14 cells. So think about that for a second. I mean, as you well know, and maybe you just talked about this in some of your previous shows, but one of the reasons we live day to day with this cellular replication, this ongoing life and death process of our cells, is that we have the capacity or the ability to make stem cells that essentially replace our cells. And of course, it depends on, whether you're talking about the gut or the skin or the eye or the liver or the brain, whatever, it depends on the organ. But we know that over about a 7-year period, roughly the entire body cellularly has been replaced. And so having that capacity to replace ourselves, obviously that's one of the hallmarks of aging, is that once we, hit our middle age, maybe even a little bit earlier, that capacity starts going down. So I'm answering your question about how the saccharides influence the brain in a very, it's kind of like we're not going down unfortunately, we're not going down a straight road. We're kind of taking a winding road to get to a point where when talking about the brain, the best thing that I can say is that we can only link the clinical changes, meaning the cognitive changes, which at 9 and 12 months. So and and I'm sorry, I didn't really talk about the design of the study too much, but it was a 1-year intervention. We put the people in the study on this, we called it generically an allopolysaccharide multi-nutrient complex. We didn't change anything else about their behavior. We didn't modify their medication regimen. We didn't change their diet. We didn't exercise them. We didn't do any other kind of therapy. We just simply introduced this one new variable into their daily lives. We gave them 4 scoops, which 1 scoop is roughly 2.5 grams per day. And we followed them over a 12-month period. We drew their blood at baseline and 12 months because of a limit of how much money we had to run the study. But we did do the neurocognitive assessment at baseline and then 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. So we have the clinical information from 5 different time points. And then we have the physiological or the biochemical at baseline and 12 months, again, because we were limited with how much money that we had to run the study. We also didn't do any kind of imaging, which the question you asked me, if we had had imaging, and I don't even know at that time, the technology, this is going back to, I think we enrolled our first subject around 2009. So it's hard to believe this has been like 14 years ago. I don't know from back then to today. I believe the imaging technology has gotten much better, to be able to look at the morphology of the brain, look for, tangles, tau, plaques, all of that stuff. So hopefully in the future, when we do have money to run a new study, we will be able to do imaging. That, to me, would be an important thing. And then also, I think you may know this better than I do. I've looked at, some of these proteins and immune cells and looking at, are they correlated in the blood with what's going on in the cerebrospinal fluid? Because I think that would also be maybe a little bit, more or better step in terms of being able to answer the question of how the polysaccharides influence what goes on in the brain. If we could actually look at the cerebrospinal fluid as opposed to just the blood. So it's really within the blood, as you know, it's really more of like it's more of a systemic effect as opposed to a local effect.
Right.
So, but going back, so with the description of the design of the study, what I can tell you is that the only thing that makes sense to Dr. Reg and our other colleagues and myself is that what's going on in the blood has to be directly attributable to what went on in the brain. Otherwise, it made no sense that our subjects had clinically and statistically significant improvements in cognitive function at 9 and 12 months. Otherwise, there's no way to explain it because nothing else changed in their lives. They were not, given more medications or, anything else happened to them. They basically just lived their lives exactly as they were before going into the study, the same way during that 12 months while they were in the study. So I would be so bold as to suggest that things like VEGF and TNF alpha, again, proteins that are classically looked at in cardiovascular disease and cancer, actually they have an effect on our brains. So you could almost extend the term inflammation to neuroinflammation. We actually calmed down that inflammation in the brain and even in the entire central nervous system. Same thing with the change in the CD4 to CD8 ratio. Obviously, that didn't have just an effect on our general immune function, but there was a clinical aspect to that of correlating what's going on with the immune system with what's going on in the central nervous system.
Right.
And then finally, with the CD14 cells, the only thing that made sense to, again, Dr. Reg and me and our other colleagues was that the body's own intelligence knew that, okay, this person's brain is not functioning properly. So we're going to send these CD14 cells out to the brain, excuse me, to either create new neurons, repair existing ones, repair synapses, clean up tau, plaques, tangles, etc. Whatever was going on there, again, that was the only thing that made sense to us, because why would cognition come back in these people that were otherwise, in many cases, a lot of these folks were barely speaking, couldn't remember their wife or their husband's name, couldn't remember their children, and these were educated people that in many cases had been professionals in whatever they were doing for their lives and their careers. successful people that were reduced to basically a piece of furniture. And so,
So moderate to severe forms of Alzheimer's, of
yes, sir.
dementia.
Yes,
That
the
is
worst.
That is unheard of. That is absolutely unheard of.
It is. And as I'm sure you may know, the FDA, interestingly, the FDA does not require big pharma to submit cognition data when they submit a new drug application. I found that bizarre as I've gone over this journey over the last, again, close to 15 years. And so here we have a dietary supplement, something totally natural, plant-based, between Dr. Reg and my own life now, combined together, he and I have over 60 years of experience with using these polysaccharides. Very, very few, if not completely non-existent, what I would call an adverse effect. I mean, occasionally you get somebody who's, I refer to as being like super sensitive. And I don't know what that's due to, maybe some other toxicity that they have that they need to get rid of, but we don't have any
of some enzyme deficiency or food intolerance that's most people don't have. Yeah,
exactly. No known interactive effects with either medications or other nutrients. There's no hypo-responsiveness, meaning that your body doesn't develop a tolerance to it. I mean, there's no downside to this. It's taking something that Mother Nature provides us, and it helps us to be healthy. And of course, there's no such thing, there never will be such thing as a cure for mortality. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get the response from people that will say, well, we're going to die anyway, who cares? I'm like, what kind of an attitude is that? Like, I want to be healthy. I want to be optimal. I want to have a great quality of life up until my last state of my life. And
absolutely.
I can't guarantee I'm going to do that, but I believe if you look at comparing the polysaccharides to, maybe other things like curcumin or certain vitamins and minerals. I mean, there are lots of other things that we need as well. But in my view, I put these polysaccharides, and particularly the ones that come from aloe vera and rice bran, up pretty much against anything in terms of their ability to help us be healthy. And it's been so rewarding to my life, really, beyond my career, my entire life, of how I've been able to help people with basically making a very simple recommendation to add these polysaccharides to their lives.
You said a lot of fascinating things here, Doc. But let me hone in on the thing about the thing about the stem cells. Now, we are still, this is shocking, but medical students are still being taught that the brain does not make new brain cells. So once you live and die with the ones that you're born with. But yet you're saying that the brain is producing 300 folds, or you mean 300%?
300%.
300% new brain stem cells, which obviously convert to nerve cells, right? I mean, that's why they get the results they're getting. I mean, that's way beyond what we've been taught. How do you explain that? Can that be explained?
Well, I think this concept of neuroplasticity, probably 20 years ago, if you talked about any of this stuff, you would have been laughed out of the room, right? I mean, people would have said, "Oh, that's heresy." Like you said, the old theory was you were born with the number of neurons you'd ever have, and if you drank a lot of alcohol or you smoked or you did other things to damage your brain, then obviously you're losing neurons as you go over through your life. But at some point, neuroplasticity became, I guess, a recognized concept. And so it's been shown through other research, not just from our lab. I mean, it's been shown through other research that the brain does have the capacity to restore itself and regenerate itself, just like most of all the other organs do. So it's a great question to ask me, how do I explain it? I guess there's, as you know, Dr. David, there's an inherent intelligence within each of us that I don't care if we had 100 Einsteins sitting in a room. I don't know if we'd ever figure that out. It's just it's like our spark of our existence, right? I mean, whatever you refer that to, it's through faith or spirituality or whatever that is, there's something within us we have that allows us to be able to do what we do. And so I just go back to the idea of, what is commonly or accepted as known that our stem cells do is that they have the capacity to migrate out to wherever we have damage or to wherever we have, something that's not homeostasis. And so if we provide the raw materials that our cells need to do that process to function in that way, then we can regenerate and restore itself. I mean, it's the same thing that we've seen in people with cancer. It's like, how did that happen? When somebody basically has a reversal of a cancer condition, how did that happen with these polysaccharides? And I'm sorry, I'm diverting the topic a little bit, but it's the same thing. Like the cancerous state came into being at least partially due to a poorly functioning immune system, and that allowed all these carcinogenic cells to create a tumor or something known as cancer. But once those polysaccharides were introduced into that person's system, then he or she's body was able to say, okay, here's the problem, let's go deal with it. And so one of the other things we know about these polysaccharides is they're actually, I didn't even mention this yet, but they're actually also able to turn on our natural killer cells, which are one of our very first lines of defense against transformed cells and viruses. So there are just so many angles to this story that are fascinating. And I hope, at least in the rest of my life, whether it's one day or 40 more years, that I'm able to help extend this line of research, because I truly believe that the power and the ability of these polysaccharides to help people be healthy is, I think we're still just kind of scratching the surface, actually. And it's unfortunate because as it works here in this country with, big pharma wanting to patent everything that they test and study. And so with nature, well, how do you patent something that Mother Nature provides us? You can't. By law, you can't do that.
Right.
So there would have to be, some sort of creative technology involved with maybe enhancing either bioavailability or absorption or, something around that. And I'm not a biochemist, so that's beyond my expertise. But I think it's unfortunate that we don't spend more money on natural things like what our group has been doing, as opposed to just spending billions and billions of dollars on genetics and pharmacology, where I think your economy of scale is so limited. Like you watch billions of dollars get plunged down these lines of research, and then maybe you get a tiny little fraction of something out of that on the other end. To me, that's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, I hear, I said, what is it now? 99.4% of studies, research studies into Alzheimer's disease have been abject failures. The thing that comes to my mind is, wait a minute, what's the 0.6 that were actually successes? Because as far as I
right, exactly.
I don't know too many that have actually been successful. I know they're studying some with some really expensive drug. I know Aduhem has been a failure. Then there's another one that that addresses the amyloid plaques. I don't know if you know about that, but they're beginning to tout its success. But that's just for mild cognitive decline. It's not doing anything about what you're talking about there with the moderate to severe form. So here's another thing that we're going to have to wrap this up very soon. But here's another thing that I saw that was really there's this Israeli professor. She's a she. I don't know if you know about her, but she's doing a lot of studies into the immune system, the systemic immune system, and dementia. A lot of her studies have obviously been with mice and guinea pigs, but they're saying that an improved, enhanced immune so what they did was they knocked out immune function in some mice, and they had now looked at their brain function and compared them with the controls. Or compared them with those who had optimized immune function, and they could see clearly that those immune functions were defective. Also were unable to, their cognition was also affected, so they couldn't go through those little maze, couldn't find the food and all that. But that was really, really interesting. I don't know, do you know about this person?
No, I don't. I'd be interested in reading more about what she's done. If you'd share with me any.
Yeah, I'll dig it up. I had saved it on from YouTube, but I think I deleted it, so I'll dig it up. But the funny thing she said was that I think they sent these mice to another lab, and the lab person calls her and he says, "Hey, can you give us some? These mice you sent us are idiot mice. Could you give us some mice that can actually do this? The only thing they did was just to knock out the immune function. Everything else was normal. Just knocked out
Idiot
the,
mice.
yeah, that's what they call them, idiot mice. So like that I had a giggle out of that too. So yeah, that thing with the immune function, I mean, there's so much probably we don't know about, but these three that you talked about, that's huge. That's huge. And I'm hoping the doctors and other medical professionals can also are watching this, and maybe they can take it from there and study it more, and then we can reach out to you. You might give me your website so that if people need more information, they can reach out to you directly as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you for that. My website is drlewisnutrition.com. It's Dr. No period Lewis, Lewis nutrition.com. And I'd be happy. You can get my phone number, my email there down at the bottom of the page of the contact us section. I'd be happy to talk to anyone. I mean, like you, I have a mission. My mission is to help people be healthy through nutrition and exercise, mostly nutrition. I know I was a big fan of Jack LaLanne. He was such a model of health to me. The guy lived an amazing life, lived to be, I think, 96, I think, and then died of a lung infection. He had just an amazing quality of life up until his last couple of weeks of his life. And he was the model to me. You know, he was a guy that, man, he walked it. I mean, whatever he said, he did it. You know, he was an exercise fanatic, and he had he was focused on juicing and eating fruits and vegetables. I mean, I love that guy. He was such an inspiration. So I just, I feel like I'm lucky in the sense that I got to meet somebody like Dr. Reg McDaniel. And I didn't even mention the patient that I met here at the university. Her name was Barbara Kimley. This was a lady that was taking the rice bran that I mentioned, and she had metastatic thyroid cancer that poor thing had gone through surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, the whole deal from a conventional perspective. And then they told her that she still only had 6 months to live, and then started taking this hydrolyzed rice bran that ended up giving her another 9 years of life. She did ultimately succumb to the cancer, but at the point that I met her, she sent me a letter to my office one day saying, "Hey, I'd like to introduce you to this hydrolyzed rice bran if you've never heard of it." And it saved my life. And I met her, and it ended up turning into a lot more research. You know, I have like two buckets or funnels. One is the aloe side, and one is the rice bran side. The rice bran was much more focused, really purely on immune function related to the HIV study I mentioned. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We ran a study with people with that. And then there have been a lot of studies around the world with people with cancer that have taken this polysaccharide. So I'm just, I'm kind of a messenger at this point. I'm very passionate about helping people be healthy, and it's so simple. You know, when you talk about diet, I mean, obviously, and you and I have talked about this in the past, diet is so culturally sensitive to people. People get defensive about their food. I mean, you start talking about making changes to people's food, and they get mad at you. You know, they don't want you to mess with their food. But if you tell people, here, do what you want to do food wise, that's your decision. But just add a little polysaccharide to your daily diet and see over time what happens. And so that to me is very important, because that's a lot of power in something that doesn't really require, a significant change in someone's daily routine. If you try to get people to change their diet and their exercise habits, that's very challenging. And I've done a lot of that in my career, and usually it's not a lot of fun. You've got to have somebody who's really motivated to do it. And unfortunately, as you know, people only get motivated when they have a crisis.
That's right.
So we don't think of prevention as being a motivational factor, unfortunately, for a lot of times and a lot of circumstances. But again, just adding this small little other, one other little thing to do in your daily routine, for most people, that's not a challenge. And so that's the beauty of these polysaccharides, is just add one more little step to your routine of, taking a shower, putting your clothes on, brushing your teeth, combing your hair, and everything else that you do on a daily basis. Just add a little more of these polysaccharides into your routine, and the benefits are just tremendous.
Absolutely. Good points. Really good points for sure. Yeah, it's a losing battle for many healthcare professionals. So yeah, that's why I always look for things that are safe, that are effective, they're simple to use, and they're simple, easy to inculcate into your daily habits. I mean, most people are popping pills anyway. So
That's
what's
right.
another pill or powder to add to it? Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
most people are not going to the gym every day, that's for sure. So yeah, that's a huge thing. So we've run out of time. I'm just going to say a big thank you to Dr. John Lewis. Thank you, John, for making this time to talk to us about this. We are going to get into this more and more for sure. I hope we can find time to really unpack some of the things you've talked about in passing and and see how we can relate that to what is going on more and more in Nigeria and other African countries where they're what I call resource poor countries, where they don't have access to all this great research and tests and lab tests and great super duper drugs and all those things. In fact, sometimes maybe it's even a good thing that they don't have access to all this.
That's right.
Another thing
Well,
for
thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Any final words you want to share with our guests, our viewers?
I would just say, health is wealth. I mean, it's great to have material things, but if you don't have your health, in my view, you don't have a lot. And so the most fundamental thing that we can do to protect our health is to eat well and make emphasis on getting the right nutrients that we need to function properly. And then of course, adding movement to that as well. But to me, again, everything relates to your health. If you don't have your health, I'm sorry, you don't have much. I don't care how much money you have or, what kind of car you drive or what kind of home you live in. You've got to be healthy to enjoy your life. And for me, that's what it's all about is creating optimal health for people.
Absolutely. Very well said. Very well said. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Thanks for joining us. Remember, the recordings are on our website, brainandbodyfoundation.org. Remember what Dr. John said, your health is your wealth. I mean, I recently had an injury to my knee from playing squash, and I can tell you, it's gone in the way of my doing so many other things, including my work and all that. So I, for one, know what poor health can do to your body and to your brain and to your mind. So take care of your health. Remember to build strength. Remember to take your vitamin D. If you're Nigerian, you better be taking your vitamin D because I've talked about this so many times. So, and of course, follow us on all our social media platforms, brainandbodyfoundation.org. God bless. Take care. See you again next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Awesome. We went a little over time, but
Thank you, buddy.
Thank you. I'm just gonna pause. I'm just gonna pause this a little.